Yeah, when he discovered LSD, then he was turned on to LSD Leary, and this was actually the right tool for the job. It combined both of Leary's requirements for his new approach, because it created not only this common ground of psilocybin did with all the mentioned effects, widening the perspective, individual self-awareness of one's place in the universe and evolution, but it also interrelated this with the functioning of the own nervous system and the own emotions, due to this additional function it has on this on the dopamine receptors. In the 1960s, LSD became very influential. It's very important to stress the fact that it didn't have to cause the 60s to have this impact. I have a very good quote by John Hicks for that, who writes that there have been grand claims that LSD was responsible for all the varied and distinct movements that make up the 1960s, including the environmental movement, women's liberation, black power, gay rights, free love, vegetarianism, communal living, the anti-war movement, and rock and roll. It is certainly true that the study of these various movements quickly throws up the influence of LSD on key figures, and it is tempting to attribute the core values of those movements to an expanded awareness, but the idea that LSD is solely responsible for creating them is clearly mistaken. The Black Power movement, for instance, sprang from the civil rights work, such as the Student Nonviolent Coordination Committee, while the music of the 1960s would not have happened without the rock and roll of the 50s, and both Martin Luther King and Elvis Presley were around before LSD. The sexual revolution may have been created by a pill, but it was contraceptive rather than psychedelic. What LSD did do, however, was act as a catalyst for the rapid expansion and evolution of these movements. It arrived at a fertile time in history, and it lit a fire under almost every emerging idea, social movement, or philosophy that it found. It did this in two ways. First, the drug enabled people to see the failings in the current system or worldview with far greater clarity. Second, it gave users a burst of creative energy and a sense of purpose. The combined influence of these two effects was to convince many people that they had the ability to do something about the problems of the world, because as soon as they stopped seeing reality as fixed and unmovable, it became something that they could change. And the combined reactions of the millions of people who took LSD was also strong enough to influence many millions of other people who never tried it. Because of this development, at the point of where LSD was actually made illegal in 1966, there were around 7 million people using it. Leary surfed on a wave of popularity, but there was a difference in his approach and the approach of most people who used it. While he was rather using it as a means of individual transformation, most people considered it to be more socially relevant. As John Hicks already pointed out, LSD appeared to many people as an anticipation of a better world, of the desired world people were striving for in those days, and it also formed some kind of encouragement to bring this world about. Leary was somehow in the middle of this fray, because he was the doctor, he was the scientific underlining of this whole movement, so he was at the center of the mass hysteria created against LSD in those days, and I have another video to illustrate this.
How can you let go last 10? How many? Tell me, how many? Does it bother you how many young people went out of their heads, maybe committed suicide, maybe OD'd, overdosed, because of your advocacy?
Louder, Wally, come on.
Are you answering my question? I'm asking you, you want to answer my question or not? I'm asking you a simple question.
Yes.
Wait a minute.
Ah, you know what? Come on, Wally. Come on, Wally.
I'm going to ask you a question. I want you to answer it. How does it make you feel that millions of young people have died and OD'd and gone bananas because you advocated the use of drugs?
Now, what you're putting out is a total 1,000% lie.
I have a friend, Art Littler.
I'm talking you off the stage. Oh, really? Yes. Please don't make me go, Raleigh.
Yeah, Leary with a very good way to react to this kind of hysteria, but as you could see, there was obviously not very much space for actually debating the problems at hand. It was rather something like a hysteria, and Leary reacted to it by just saying like, okay, you're just hysteric, that's it. So the time for actually reconsidering this entire history of the 60s, all these obvious damages that LSD did to a lot of people was not the 60s themselves. It was far too hot as a topic. But out of these times, out of these developments, Leary came up with the idea to form a general model for the development of the human nervous system that would combine his own research into all these social games and relations and how they work, and to give a perspective on how the nervous system would develop further, where he said that these struggles in the 60s would be like the first anticipation, the first signs of these visible coming steps. So he came up with the concept of neuroevolution, which describes the human nervous system as an ensemble of several autonomous neural circuits, like autonomous brains, that develop both over the course of natural evolution and during each individual's life. And what is actually developing over the course of this evolution is there's an increase in the complexity of interaction with the outside world and with oneself. The first four of these neural circuits were labeled by Leary as the terrestrial circuits. I'll explain that later why he labeled it this way, but they are the circuits that have already developed and are already like hegemonial in most humans. I will just quickly go through this. This is actually something where you can give a talk on any single one of them. The first of these circuits is something that many animals, many very early animals already developed. It's a very simple binary concept of the world about like pleasure and anxiety, which leaves the life form with about like exactly these two options to react to it: attraction or distraction. This is somehow very similar to Freud's concept of the oral phase of the infant, the first very simple psychological step, the attraction of like mama's tits, for example, and the distraction from pain. The second circuit offered a whole new set of possibilities for those animals who developed it, mainly predators. There is the other option of fight, which leads to new, another set of binary approach to the world. Domination or submission as like the outcome of the fight, and the options for acting would be like attacking or retreating. This is very similar to what Freud referred to as the anal phase of the infant, which is, as we see, a little more complex, gives another set of binary options. The third circuit is something that humans actually became something like the masters in. There are other animals that developed it, for example, apes and ants. The main point is that there is something between this individual and the outside world. Something is put in between, an intermediation, which could be tools.